Good morning, Bitcoins, and welcome to Mad Bitcoins Live. Today is Wednesday, May 31st, 2017. The price of Bitcoin is $23.69, a recent upswing, perhaps caused by the resumption of withdrawals on the Chinese Bitcoin exchanges. Or it could just be Wednesday. We've also got news from CoinDesk. The Brave browser and their basic attention token sold $35 million worth of tokens in 30 seconds. An incredible sellout, with some buyers sending as much as $4.7 million in a single transaction, and others spending $6,000 on transaction fees to make sure that their tokens went to the front of the line. Some people are saying they've already tripled their money on the Brave attention token. Meanwhile, we've got a new article from Chris DeRose. Dear SEC, ICOs and tokens are killing innovation. Chris lists a lot of reasons for this, and we'll be having him on tomorrow's show. So check back tomorrow around 7 p.m. or maybe I think it's more like 5 p.m. Pacific time. So we're going to have Chris DeRose here tomorrow to talk about SEC and the ICOs. But today we're joined by Jimmy Song, Bitcoin developer and Twitterer at Jimmy Song. How's it going, Jimmy?
It's going great. Thanks for having me on. A lot of interesting things going on this week, huh?
It's been pretty wild. You gotta like that $35 million in 30 seconds, and then boom, Chris's article comes out, and now we've really got ourselves a debate going on these ICOs.
Yeah, I mean, only 160 people got in on this thing. I guess. Good for them, but yeah, it does bring up some questions about like how it's not really crowdfunding if it's only like 160 people, right?
It seems like a very small crowd. I have to question the widespread mania about this. It kind of seems like they all were plugged in beforehand too, but I don't know. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here today to talk about the UASF, and I got the hat to show it.
Yeah, I got one too, actually. I got Samson. I want to thank Samson Mao for giving me one of these. I think I got the last one at the Blockstream party last week. It was great.
That's so funny because all of these hats used to be in a box here in my bedroom. So it's pretty funny to see them go out into the world and think about that they were stuck here in a box for a while.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, we were just going to talk today about the UASF, and you just published a new article in Medium. Go ahead and show it again. Bitcoin, UASF, and skin in the game. And we just wanted to work through and try to answer some technical questions. So what is a UASF? What would happen?
Well, UASF stands for User Activated Soft Fork, and the whole idea was sort of put on the dev list by an anonymous developer named Shaolin Fry. Great name, by the way, Shaolin Fry. He noticed that really every individual sort of has their own sovereignty over the Bitcoin node that they run, and he thought that, hey, you know what, if you can sort of wall off certain miners and get some other miners on your side, then you can essentially have something like a soft fork. And he called it user activated soft fork because I guess it's driven more by users, though the actual activation happens by miners. But it's this whole idea of you are your own bank and you have your right to your own border, or whatever you do with your own node is yours. And to the degree that that's true, that I mean that is very much true. But I obviously have some particulars about it that I published in my article. And you can be your own node, and you can sort of accept or reject whichever transactions or blocks that you want. But that's not really useful unless other people agree with you, right? Like I can reject all transactions that end with the letter T or something like that in any of the output addresses, but like no one's going to agree with me very quickly, and then it's not really useful. You don't really have the shared blockchain. You just have your own version of it. But yeah, that's sort of long-winded answer to UASF.
let's go ahead and walk people through what would actually happen. So it's August 1st, right? So
Mhm.
on August 1st, this set of code right here, which I'm
Mhm.
showing to everybody, even though it's a little difficult to read, this set of code would go through. And as you say here, if the users support it, it goes through. Then one miner or
Mhm.
more than one miner would have to support it. And if that miner supported it, would they basically make another chain where they start rejecting blocks that don't have SegWit enabled?
Yeah, so it gets a little bit technical, but right now there's a BIP9 which has a bit assigned for BIP 141, which is the SegWit Bitcoin improvement proposal. And there was talk of a Flag Day activation. This one's slightly different in the sense that this one is BIP 148 is saying, hey, on this day, starting August 1st, if you're not signaling that BIP9 bit, which says I support, this block is ready for BIP 141, then I am not going to accept your blocks. That's essentially what it says. So it's a forced orphaning, and orphan blocks happen all the time on the network, right? Like two miners find the same block, find a block like very close to each other, and they have the same parent block. In this case, what I would call forced orphaning is if you're not signaling for SegWit, then nodes that are running BIP 148 software would say you're not a valid block to me. And if enough people do that, that's sort of the idea behind the user activated soft fork, is that there's sort of like a sub network within the Bitcoin network, if you will, that just won't accept those blocks. And it all depends, because like you need enough hash power to at least find one block before you can do that. And that is not a trivial amount at this stage, because there is just so much hashing power out there. And if it's something like 1% of the hashing power, that means it's normally 10 minutes, so you have to multiply that by 100, right? Like that's 1,000 minutes. That's that's almost a day, right? Like I think there's 1,440 minutes in a day. So it's not easy to find this block, and you need a substantial amount of power, hashing power to do it. Now, if there's like 10 to 25%, like if there's under 10%, I have my doubts on what would like whether or not that chain would be viable. There's something like 10 to 25, like 40%, something like that, then it might actually, of the network hashing power as of August 1st, then something interesting might happen, and you might have like a really long drawn out war where there are two coins or something like that. If it's over,
so at that point, would there be two chains? And then we're looking at, does an exchange list it? If an exchange lists it, now they're buying and selling on two chains. They're mining on two chains. We have kind of like two Bitcoins without even a hard fork, right?
Yeah. Well, so here's the thing: for an exchange to list it, right, they're going to need to accept deposits and give out withdrawals. And there's two risks to those. One is if you're accepting deposits on the non-BIP 148 fork, right, on the other side of the fork, then that chain has the risk of wiping out, right? The entire chain might reorganize. So they're not going to want to accept deposits from that side of the fork, which makes it so, I mean, like you can have 100 confirmations, but that wouldn't matter because you might get reorganized away to the other chain. So what you end up with is the situation where they can really only accept one side until the other side does something to make like that reorganization risk impossible. The other risk that the exchange has is on the withdrawal side. Now, when somebody withdraws, there's a transaction, right? But that transaction may be replayable on the other fork, in which case, they would lose not just the BIP 148 coins, but they would lose coins on the other chain. And that's called replay protection. So they're going to want both before any sort of trading can happen. But here's the thing, like in order to do that, it would have to permanently fork. There would be two Bitcoins forever in order for that to be possible. Like in order for an exchange to accept deposits, in order for an exchange to give out withdrawals, you have on this other fork, it has to be a permanent split. In which case, well, then you're left with 2 Bitcoins forever and ever, which kind of sucks, right? Like for me, like this is like the premise upon which I invested is it's not going to split. It's very hard to change, and it's like that's going to suck huge. But you know, all the incentives are there for the other side of the fork, right? What we'll call legacy coin, to make it a permanent fork, because people are going to want to trade it. People are going to want, miners are going to want protection, like from wipeout. It doesn't just affect the exchanges; it also affects the miners. All their mining reward goes away if it gets reorganized to the other chain. And there's also, there's so many ways in which everyone's going to want to trade. Even people that support BIP 148, they're going to want to sell their legacy coins, right? Like, hey, I want to get rid of these. I don't think this is going to work. The other side's worth anything, so I want to sell them right away. Well, you can't do that until there's a permanent fork, right? Like, there's no way to do that. I mean, there is a way. You could do something like futures markets, but that has its own set of problems, especially with custodial risk. Like, you basically have to keep the coins on an exchange the entire time. I think Kyle Torpy had an interesting proposal that might be able to get around that, but that's nowhere near mature to be able to do. So, like, you have all these problems, so that, like, in order to resolve the problem of the 2 forks, you actually have to fork to find out, which is kind of like Schrodinger's cat, right? Like, you open it, you find out what the hell happened. So, yeah, there's no real way to trade it and have it merge back into a single coin. Like, once horses have left the barns, right? Like, it's just sort of done at that point. Like, yeah, Humpty Dumpty's broken. Yeah.
So what is BIP 148? What is BIP 149? Are they different? Okay. What are they, different types of UASFs?
Yes, they are. So BIP 148 sort of forces signaling for BIP 141, right? And this is why, like, a lot of people are saying, hey, you know what? If there's 51% hash power on BIP 148, then, you're just going to orphan all these blocks, and you're going to have the longer chain as the BIP 148, and you'll stay on a single chain. Well, that may be true if nobody else does anything, but the other chain might, anticipate that and fork off on their own. And there's all sorts of like game theory incentives that you have to think about that are possible. But BIP 149 is a little different. It's based, instead of BIP 9, which requires 95%, of everyone to agree, and then at that point it triggers. It's based on BIP 8, which has no failure mode, which is kind of like, when I read it, it was like, oh, that's very interesting. So think of BIP 9 as sort of saying, okay, the default is the status quo. Okay, the default is the status quo. With BIP 8, it's more like the default is whatever feature that we wanted to be in there. So with BIP 8 and BIP 149 by extension, what you're saying is, okay, if everybody doesn't agree by, I think it's like June 1st, 2018 or something like that. If everybody doesn't agree, then SegWit is the law, of blockchain. That's it. And like you can do it beforehand, or you could do it on or everyone's gonna have to upgrade like on June 1st or something like that. So it's the base state is a little different between BIP 8 and BIP 9, and that's really the difference. And I think that's honestly why a lot of core developers support BIP 149 more than BIP 148.
So basically, BIP 149 just activates a different lower BIP than the other one, and it has a different date, right? It's more like 2018, whereas the other one's coming up in August, right? Yeah.
So, I mean, basically, BIP 148 is saying if the network doesn't get to 95%, we're going to go back to the way things were. And with BIP 149, it says if the network rejects it, we're still going to have it as of June 1st. And, we're just giving you time to... It's a different mentality, right? Like it's sort of saying, like it isn't the miner's choice. It is sort of our it is the collective coin, Bitcoin developers and community that's deciding instead of the miners. It's a different sort of power dynamic, if you will.
So if BIP 149 went through, you wouldn't need that miner to kick it off. You wouldn't need 10 to 15% of the hashing power to cause the UASF.
No, it would just happen automatically at latest June 1st. It could happen before then. Obviously, like that means like everyone would have to be running the software. There's no obligation to upgrade in Bitcoin. So a bunch of miners can just say, you know what, I'm not going to upgrade, and we're going to stay on like the previous versions, and we're not going to add BIP 8. And BIP 8, I don't know if it's actually even been merged yet, or BIP 149 or whatever. It's all sort of like in the planning stages. But like there are many mechanisms still sort of to be done. But like that's the big difference, right? Is what is the default state? What happens if we can't agree? What do we do? That's the big difference between BIP 148 and 149. 148 says, let's be conservative. Let's just go back to the way things were. BIP 149 says, well, we can't agree. Let's just go to this thing, this new thing, which is very interesting in my mind, because it does shift the power dynamic between like users, developers, and miners. I think you've had this on your show where you show that triangle of like sort of
the much maligned triangle.
Well, I actually think that's a really good way to put it, right? Like those three have a lot of power, and it's sort of a little bit of like users and developers asserting their power over miners a little bit. So that's kind of like the triangle changes if BIP 8 goes through, and that's sort of the way you deploy things.
We'd like to thank our 77 or so viewers for watching the show. If everyone could give us a thumbs up and a share, that'll help more people find the show. And now on to the third scaling option of the night. What about the Silbert Accords with SegWit plus 2 megabytes? How does that compare to 148 and 149?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because like the code is still kind of being written, and it's hard to tell exactly what it is, right? Because like I think Jeff Garzik is like sort of leading that effort, and he's sort of updating his pull requests. Like, and there's one pull request that's got like 100 comments, right? Like there are people all over trying to comment on it, and part of it was, hey, why don't you accept this other bit instead of bit 4, which is what they designated, and I think they're going to make bit 1 and bit 4 like sort of equivalent or something like that. And it's not even merged in. There's a lot of code to be done, and they're talking about like releasing it in a few weeks. I don't know how they're going to test it in time and all that stuff. So it's still kind of a big like unknown in my mind, because there just isn't enough information about how it's going to get deployed and who's going to deploy it and how they're going to do it, and these are questions that core developers rightly think about all the time, right? So like, how would we do this? A hard fork is not easy, and if everybody doesn't upgrade, or if it's upgraded under adversarial conditions, it's going to have some serious side effects, and it's going to it would be surprising if it ended well, if you had a contentious hard fork and it went like it ended up without like 2 Bitcoins or something like that. So
isn't there also, there's a technical question where if you get SegWit in, and then if the Lightning Network is a real thing, then you have enough scaling, and why do you need to hard fork to 2 megabytes? Yeah,
so that's not part of the New York agreement. So for certain, you need to hard fork to 2 megabytes as part of the New York agreement, and there would be people that would walk out on that agreement if you didn't have that hard fork in there somewhere. And I don't know if it has to execute at exactly the same time, or later, or maybe even before. Like that's the sort of question that everyone wants to know. Sounds like it's going to happen at the same time, but no one really like knows until like the software is final and everyone signed off on it. It's kind of a design by committee approach, which has its downside. So it'll be interesting to see how that works.
Yeah, it seems like I won't buy your car unless you put this antenna ball on top of the receiver, and the antenna ball doesn't affect the car at all. I'm just not seeing this. But what about, I've heard rumors that the SegWit adopted by the Silbert Accords would not stop ASIC boost. Have you heard anything about that?
Well, that I think I haven't heard anything about that, but it's hard to see how you could have SegWit without that. I mean, with like it would have to get rid of covert ASIC boost. Overt is always going to be okay. It's just it'll be really obvious to the network because you'll be flipping version bits. Covert ASIC boost is always going to, I mean, like with almost any form of SegWit, it's going to be very difficult to make that compatible with covert SegWit, just because you need a commitment in the coin base that spans the entire tree, and that makes it very difficult to do. But yeah, I mean, I suppose it's possible if they design SegWit very differently, but as far as I know, it would eliminate covert ASIC boost.
So what comes next? What's in the future? Will we have a UASF? Will the Silbert Accords continue?
Yeah, so it's the most interesting thing was a poll I put up on Twitter a couple days ago. Which alternate SegWit implementation do you prefer? And I listed, the New York agreement, extension blocks, BIP 148, BIP 149, and BIP 148 won by a mile, which was really surprising to me because I know Greg Maxwell, Matt Corallo, Alex Marcos, a bunch of other Peter Woola, a lot of the core developers think 148 will end in a lot of strife, and they are very much against BIP 148. Here, let me paste the link. Yeah, if you want to click on the group chat in your thing, you can show them that or something. But there's a lot of people among the core developers that think this is completely unsafe, and like there's, I think Luke Jr. is for BIP 148, and Peter Todd's more open to it, but pretty much a lot of developers think this is not a good idea, and yet it got like 45% of the poll, which was kind of surprising to me, right? And BIP 149, I think, is their preferred method. Extension blocks actually surprisingly came in second, and that's sort of that alternate, Bcoin implementation from Purse.io with Andrew Lee and JJ. So I like, as far as what's going to happen, what I pointed out in the article is you really need skin in the game, right? Like hats and putting your name in the put a UASF in your Twitter name, that's not really doing anything, right? Like if this isn't like a politician that you can sway by like just calling them every day. That it doesn't work like that. Bitcoin doesn't care about your feelings, right? It only cares about like what you can do for the network. And at this point, if you're not really mining, then I don't really see a way that you can coordinate well enough to be able to pull this off. And I said this in the article. If you're trying to do UASF without mining power, what you're really doing is trying to solve the Byzantine generals problem without proof of work. And that would be a computer science breakthrough, because that was one of the breakthroughs of Bitcoin, was that you were able to solve the Byzantine generals problem, and that involved using proof of work. Mining is proof of work. So if you don't mine and you're trying to solve this problem, you're going to have a hard time, because you're going to need some sort of CS breakthrough to do it.
But obviously, we have a lot of frustration in the users out there. They just want to change something. They want to do something for Bitcoin. So what can they do besides changing their Twitter handles or getting a cool hat? They're tired of no progress. They see a potential cartel situation. What can they do?
Yeah, so I was actually really surprised when, like a day after my article, they started a core Slack channel for UASF mining, and people like Trace Mayer were like, we're gonna have to pay the price. Let's start like buying miners, And I think they have the right approach. If it's going to work at all, it's going to have to be users spending money to go get miners and have enough hash power to make it work. Because otherwise, all you're doing is talking, right? Like, and Bitcoin doesn't care about that. If you can manage to add hashing power to the UASF BIP 148 fork, well, then you got something, right? Like that. And I tweeted this out this morning. Well, I have a lot of respect for these people. I don't know if it'll work. And, honestly, they have a very hard hill to climb. But if it works, then they solve mining centralization for free, because that means there's enough hashing power among all these users that it's like almost, it's a significant percentage, and it can easily get to 50-something%, at which point there's no centralization anymore. And that would be a really interesting thing. But that means a lot of people spending a lot of money, right? Like not just like one whale like Trace May or something spending $100 million. It means a lot of individuals spending, $7,000, right? Like on 10 miners, and like 5 miners here, 10 miners there. Like you're gonna have to spend a lot of money in order to change Bitcoin, because that's kind of what Bitcoin demands. If it were easy to change it, someone would have done it already. Like it would have been very easy. If it was easy, someone would have done it already. You could just like, if it was easy as like signing a, change.org petition, I guarantee you it would have been done already. But it hasn't. And there's a reason for that. And it's because Bitcoin, this is one of the huge security properties of Bitcoin. It is extremely difficult to change.
And again, we're seeing the same thing with our government. I mentioned this on the show the other night, and I'm going to do it again. Is Trump had this tweet where he said, why don't we just change the Senate to 51 votes? And then I could pass my whole agenda. And I was like, yeah, that'd be great. But the whole checks and balances, all the system that we put in to prevent tyranny is the system that's slowing him down. And the same thing with Bitcoin here. It's so difficult to cause change, protecting us from tyranny. So it seems like the main way forward with the 148, they have to get 10 to 15% of the hashing power, but really they might need 50. They can cause a long, prolonged split where there would be 2 Bitcoin chains. Then they hope that an exchange picks it up. Then they hope that there's buying and selling on both chains, and somehow they win. Right? So that doesn't sound great.
Well, so the one way that BIP 148 can really win, okay, and this is, I think, my best case scenario, and I think this is the best case scenario from most people supporting it, is if they can show before August 1st that they have more than 50% of the hashing power. It's at that point that sort of the other holdouts, if you will, they have to decide, are we going to fork or not? Right? Are we going to fork or not? And if they fork, it has to be a permanent fork. It can't ever merge back. And if at that point they capitulate and join instead of forking, then UASF 148 has won. Right? Like that's the best case scenario. Is if
so maybe we're really just talking brinksmanship and high stakes poker, and that maybe we need to do what the Russians did during the Cold War. They only had about 1 missile, but they put 8 mirrors around it, and they said they had 9 missiles. Maybe we can get an ant miner and get some mirrors and brink this thing. Is that the idea? Is that maybe we don't even have to do 148? We just have to threaten it to the end of the line, and then they'll turn around and they'll all come back from the brink, and we can be friends again. Now he's set off the smoke alarms.
You're that excited, huh? Yeah. So here's the thing. It has to be a credible threat. You can't fake 9 miners, because they do proof of work. Proof of work is objective and measurable, and that's the thing. If it's not a credible threat, then there's no threat to respond to, right? Like if it's like a 5-year-old saying, hey, I'm going to beat you up, like that's not really a credible threat. But if it's like a UFC fighter saying, I'm going to beat you up, that's a credible threat, right? Like there's a big difference between those two. And hashing power percentage is the way to do it. And it's very interesting from a game theory perspective, because if you show the hashing power before, then that gives the other side time to react. And that, like, it's like if a UFC fighter threatens to beat you up, well, you could go get a gun or something, right? Like there's ways to sort of like mitigate that, and you can escalate or de-escalate. You can capitulate, or you can like make it even worse. And that's the danger of brinksmanship, is that you can bring it to, even if you're successful, you might still not get what you want, and you may end up forking regardless, right? Like you may get 80% of the hashing power. You may get that, but you know what? The 20% might still fork, and that's a real possibility. And you know, I mean, there are people that are saying, well, you know, if we have 80%, then we're definitely going to win. Well, you don't know that. You have no idea, right? Like there's all sorts of like dynamics in a nonlinear system that you have no idea of, that you have no control of. There are so many people with so much money in this space that, you know, if just one person like put in $100 million in an order, you know, like everything can change. So like there's no way to know beforehand what's going to happen. And like the unfortunate thing about this scenario is that it's not deterministic, and you can't know beforehand what's going to happen, right? Like, and really, yeah, I think you made this point before with the 51 votes in the Senate. If 51% wins, well, now you've set a precedent, right? Now you're going to be able to do with the 51% later, and you know, it might not be something that you like as much, right? Like, and this can get to be a really nasty game, which is why I don't know if it's the greatest idea in the world. And you know, like, but who cares what Bitcoin doesn't care what I think. That Bitcoin doesn't care about my feelings.
And there is still a nuclear option out there, right? They could change the hashing algorithm to something else, make all of the miners worthless, and then solve their own difficulty problem, because they could probably mine whatever the new thing is with less chips.
Yeah, and that the proof of work change is the nuclear option, and that I mean, I could see that happening if, say, you know, BIP 148 fork, right, happens, and there's a permanent fork, and the larger hash rate starts attacking the you know, the legacy chain starts attacking the minority chain. At that point, I could see that chain changing the proof of work, which would be really the only way out of getting attacked, short of, you know, being able to buy more miners, which presumably they would have done before. So yeah, it's a very tricky situation, and you know, I mean, like I've written this before. You know, war is not a good idea. It's going to destroy value, and it's you know, I likened it to divorce. It's going to be a war that's going to be fought for a long time. But who knows, right? Like those are my thoughts, and again, Bitcoin doesn't care about what I think. You know, you know, there's a whole market, there's users, miners, developers, and it sort of acts in concert, and there's nonlinear relationships between all of them. So it's really hard to predict what's going to happen. And but yeah, I mean, this is UASF BIP 148 in action, and I really do think August 1st is going to be a major day in Bitcoin.
Well, just like Rumsfeld said, you have your known knowns, you have your unknown knowns, and then you have your unknown unknowns.
These are known unknowns, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, he was the best. He also said, we know where they are. They're north or east or west or south of here. It is a fact.
Yeah, we know what'll happen. It'll either split or not, and price will go up or not. And yeah,
you can predict anything. If you're a good enough economist, you can just tell me that it's raining and it could be sunny outside.
Yeah.
Let's go to some criticism that we had of Jimmy today. Andrew DeSantis, the radical Twitterer, said that Jimmy's neutral, spineless, time-wasting stance is not something that he would promote. So, Jimmy, in the past, you've said that one of the options to this is just to do nothing. Bitcoin, as it is a proof of what are they calling it? Storage of value. It's not a currency that we send around a lot. It's not a payments network, but it becomes this slow-moving storage of value network. I guess that DeSantis, and he obviously has the BIP 148, he has the hat. He would be advocating for this, you know, pushing it through, which again is a frustration. We may have a mining cartel. People want progress. They want to go forward. They have new code. They want to try out the Lightning Network, et cetera, but we can't seem to break through this. What do you think of this criticism of your saying that we should just basically do nothing, or
Mhm.
what do you think of him, that we should just push it
Yeah,
through?
I mean, I've like not interacted with this guy other than one time, and I mean, he blocks me on Twitter, so I didn't even see this tweet until he just showed me right now. So I mean, his criticism is that I'm spineless. Okay, so I'm not taking your position, so I'm spineless now. All right, well, best of luck to you. I mean, he's just sort of like, like, if he wanted to do something, go buy a miner, right? Like that, put some money where your mouth is instead of just like tweeting about it. I mean, and that may be the best thing for the network. I don't know. What I did say about like the status quo is that in lieu of sort of the Lightning Network SegWit solutions, I believe there will be market solutions, right? Like Ryan X Charles, though he's moved on to Litecoin. At one point was going to have a payment hub, and that was going to be relatively cheaper. But the economics of the business model he was trying to do didn't really work out with Bitcoin, so he's moving now to Litecoin. But things like that are totally reasonable, right? Like if Person Coinbase, can sort of have a pseudo payment channel between each other in terms of accounts on each other's systems, then they don't have to transact on the blockchain except like once a day, and that would totally work, and that could reduce transaction value, and that sort of thing is a wonderful thing, and there are entrepreneurs that should be coming in and doing this stuff, and I have no doubt there are lots of people working on this very problem, and in that way, I think Bitcoin can scale without any of this stuff, and it's been a great store of value, and that's why it has value. But, I mean, like, if Andrew wants to, wear hats and think that he's doing something, well, more power to him, right? Like, I mean, I've gotten this criticism before. It's like, well, why aren't you standing up more for this? I'm like, well, first of all, Bitcoin doesn't care what I think, right? Like, it doesn't care about my feelings. I contribute code, whatever, but like, that doesn't matter, right? Like, it's, in the end, it's all about what the network is. And, like, these people that are saying, hey, you know what, like I'm gonna wear a hat and it's gonna make a difference. No, I mean, like it's useful for signaling to others where your stance is, but there's no real politician to go and like change the mind of, really. And like, even if you could, I don't think they're gonna be swayed by your hyper aggressive stance on this stuff. I don't know. But then again, I could be wrong. Maybe the brinksmanship will work. I don't know. Maybe Andrew's right. Who knows?
And part of this is a good thing. We don't really want a Bitcoin where adding something to your Twitter handle or wearing a cool hat or having a 51% vote gets you a change in Bitcoin. We want a more difficult to change Bitcoin. We want it to be an academic argument and months and months of debate and 2 great coders or 4 great coders, a whole ecosystem of debate. And that's what I'm seeing. So we have some questions from the audience. Ty asks, he says, Jimmy, what do you predict will happen, and are you holding on to your Bitcoin during this madness? What should users do?
Oh, man. Well, first of all, I'm not going to give any financial advice because honestly, like I have no idea what's going to happen. And it is a very difficult thing to predict with nonlinear systems. I mean, try predicting the weather tomorrow. I don't care how good a weatherman you are. You're not going to like predict it with 100% accuracy. And go out a week or something like that. You'd be lucky if you got like 50% accurate. Go out a month, you're flipping a coin basically at that point. And this is like 2 months away. There's a lot of stuff that's going to happen that is going to change things over that time. Closer to August 1st, I would be more comfortable making a prediction. This far out, it is extremely difficult because there's so many variables. Who knows? Maybe like a lot of users are like, let's go buy like miners and like start showing our strength. If that happens, I mean this, and like people snowball into that. Who knows? Maybe there's more probability of that winning. But I don't know. As far as my personal stuff, I mean, I'm not interested in a Bitcoin that's going to be, like 2 separate Bitcoins that's like very like autocratic or authoritarian. I mean, if I wanted an authoritarian coin, I'd be in Ethereum, right? Like that's not where I want to be. Yeah, I mean, because of that, if the more likely the split is, probably I will divest, in proportion. So that's my personal stance.
And now this is like a hard fork where you would have coins on both sides of the chain. Could the users just hold both sides and hedge that way? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, but that assumes that, like, so this was what I was arguing in the article that you mentioned, is that, store of value requires something to be very consistent, right, and not change, right? Immutability is a huge property of store of value, and you need immutability. If you suddenly have two different coins, that's not really you've sort of broken immutability a little bit, because now you got two different coins. And I like, if my premise is correct that store of value is the big driver of Bitcoin value, then splitting the coin or having a hard permanent fork would mean that, that the store, you violated some part of the store of value proposition, and that would mean that price would go down. But I don't know if I'm right? Like, and this, and I openly admit that I have no idea, but there is risk, and that's something that everyone should take into account, obviously.
Now, you mentioned Ethereum. There's more and more interest in Ethereum. The price is going up. There's more projects on there every day. Will Ethereum have the same scaling problems that Bitcoin has?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, certainly today, because of the BAT ICO, like, there seemed to be like a flood of transactions that tried to get in at that like very second, and it was kind of a big mess. Yeah, I mean, I can see, like, and everyone says like ICOs are Ethereum's killer feature or whatever. The more ICOs there are, I guess the more problems like this they'll have. And there's an article today about how there's some sort of gambling application, a decentralized application on Ethereum that was like taking up a lot of transaction block space or whatever. I could definitely see it being that way. Certainly, they utilize the block space more liberally than Bitcoin does, and that's a significant difference between the two. Whether or not they raise their block size or something, who knows? And I mean, that's more a question for those set of developers. But I imagine they'll have more scaling problems the more popular it gets.
We're seeing some comments in the chat trying to compare this to a stock split, and I'm not really seeing that as a comparison. When a stock split happens, like say Apple split, you had 1 million shares. Suddenly now there's twice as many. There's 2 million shares. Everyone gets double shares. They're now worth half as much. Maybe they go up a little or down a little. This is not really the same thing. It doesn't really help the users. It doesn't make Bitcoin any cheaper. This isn't really a comparable situation. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think for the most part, there is one scenario that it was a tweet earlier, and I've heard this from some other friends that I have enormous respect for technically. It's possible that you end up with two coins, one that are very different purposes, if that makes sense. One for sort of more a transactional chain, and another that's more of a store of value chain. I don't know. And like a lot of altcoins like sort of filled those niches, right? Like Monero is like the dark web coin. Zcash is also competing in that space. But yeah, I mean, like it's possible that like you have two coins and they're both useful, which is why like a good friend of mine said, I think it'll split. I think it'll be two coins, and they'll both be worth 1,500. And like the sum will be greater. Who knows? I don't know. Maybe it will be that way. Maybe it won't. It's like I said, this very nonlinear system, and it is extremely difficult to predict what will happen. And anyone that tells you that they know is guessing or lying.
Got another question from BC Joey. He says, why hasn't anyone else developed a new ASIC in the growing crypto market?
Besides Bitmain?
I believe so, yeah. Okay.
Oh, I mean, there are plenty of players in the market. Bitfury, unfortunately, doesn't sell to the public. But Canaan.io, like I've been giving them a ton of business, by the way. I always point to them because, like they use the same semiconductor manufacturer and everything, like, right? Like they sell all over the world, and you can go on their website. They just dropped their prices last week. I was talking to a Canaan.io rep, by the way, and confirming some numbers. But yeah, I mean, they just dropped their prices. You could go and buy them, right? Like, and they're definitely not affiliated with Bitmain as far as I know. And like they produce their own stuff. They apparently distinguish themselves from Bitmain because they have like higher quality parts and their miners can last longer or something like that. So I mean, there are lots of that's at least one. I've heard of others. I don't know them personally, but at least Canaan, I've met the guy, and he's told me about like their chip manufacturing processes and stuff like that. Sounds reasonable. They're and go to that Slack chat on Bitcoin Core, right? Like there's UASF mining. There's plenty of people talking about, hey, I want to go buy miners so I can support this thing. Well, yeah, go for it. Like there's probably going to be a Canaan.io rep in there at some point and saying, okay, 5 from you, 2 from you, let's make this happen, blah blah blah. So
well, and there were several other mining companies, and a lot of them struggled to make it. And as we're looking back at it now, it might have been because of ASIC boost.
Well, the thing is, like, they were on like different processes, right? They were on like 28 millimeter or 40 millimeter, and those are not going to compete with 16 nanometer, right? Like it's just like the advantage that Bitmain had is that they figured out that supply chain well, and they have some really good chip designers. I know like TerraMiner here in Austin, like they had some trouble with their circuit boards and things like that. They power supplies, and they had to like add a second power supply. Like that is not easy stuff to figure out. And if you get it wrong, then your whole batch is wrong, and like you end up like losing a lot of money, which a lot of these companies have, honestly. I like ASIC boost. It might have helped them. I don't know if it has or it hasn't. I will say though that mining is just so profitable right now for them that it's probably around 1% of their revenue if they're using it. So it's not like they can for like comparison, they can save like 5 or 6% by liquid cooling, which is a lot more straightforward, and they can do right now, but they're not doing it. So that should tell you all that you need to know.
All right, we've got another question from Eduardo. He says, what is the decisive point of the hard fork through BIP 148? I'm not sure.
Okay, so the decisive point would be so say BIP 148 has a few blocks going, and it does look like they're going to continue. At that point, the legacy chain, and this is something that Jihan has tweeted, and it's in my article at the end, is there's a UASF, there's going to be a UAHF, and what he's referring to is what you're going to actually do is not a soft fork. I'm going to make sure it's a hard fork, and that means that there's a permanent fork. Like I said before on the show, like this permanent fork is in the interest of everybody if you want to trade anything, right? To have market signals like prices happen, you need a permanent fork. So he's going to make that happen. He's going to protect the skin in the game on his legacy chain by making it a permanent fork. And that would be that moment. That would be the point of no return. And from Jihan's perspective, or from the miners' perspective, it may be actually before that, because they've openly threatened this, right? Like it's very much out there, and the purpose of that is sort of as a deterrent to tell people, hey, you support UASF, it's going to be 2 coins no matter what. And that's sort of like a game theory, again, like what you were saying. It's a little bit of brinksmanship here, saying, hey, you do this, I am doing this for sure. And who knows how that plays out. So I like, from whatever your perspective might be, the point of no return is either when the legacy coin decides to like do a permanent fork, or if like UASF mines its first block, who knows.
All right, we've got another question from Kyle. Kyle says, what about the futures market for UASF?
Yeah, and like he and I have talked about this on Twitter, so I am not surprised about this discussion. I really wish that a futures market could work out, but like as the BU futures market on Bitfinex has shown, it's not very liquid, right? And at least the way that it works on Bitfinex is that you have to hold Bitcoins at Bitfinex until the bet resolves, essentially. And for that, it's either December 31st, 2017, when if Bitcoin Unlimited doesn't hard fork, then you get then sort of like the Bitcoin Unlimited coins sort of disappear, or there is an actual hard fork, and you can't sort of get anything out until then. And that presents sort of a problem because you have to keep your Bitcoins on Bitfinex, and like they've been hacked before. That kind of sucks. You don't want to do that. And that requires a lot of people to sort of deposit money into it. Maybe I think Kyle's talked about maybe having sort of a decentralized futures market or something like that. Haven't looked into that very much, but as far as I can tell, it's not very mature. Not many people know about it. If you need sort of a lot of liquidity for it to mean something, and this was shown like in other sort of futures markets, right? Remember Brexit, remember Trump? Like those betting markets got crushed because, like they said it was like 70% probability that Hillary would win, but like those are very easily manipulatable if it's not very liquid, and there's a lot of interest in sort of manipulating those markets, especially if they're seen as predicting something. So. Yeah, I hope that there could be a very liquid futures market that can settle things all once and for all and sort of avoid the brinksmanship, right? Like if you knew that one side would win, then you wouldn't do it, right? Like the other side, if you knew you were going to lose the war, you wouldn't get into the war in the first place. And that's kind of the hope with a futures market. I just don't know if it's indicative enough of the future to be able to do that.
All right, we've got another question from Christian. He says, in the short term, are you bearish or bullish?
Well, I will refer to something that Ben Davenport told me last week. In a bear market, good news doesn't matter. In a bull market, bad news doesn't matter. There's been a lot of bad news over the past month or so. It doesn't seem to have affected the bull market. So I'm going to stick with that. And, I'm slightly bullish, but like who knows? This is not my area of expertise, guys. Like like go ask Tone Vase or something, right? Like or Tor de Meester. Like they know, they can do the triangles and figure out candles and wicks and stuff like that. That's not me. And there are lots of Twitter people that you can follow that will draw all those things out for you, and they're much better at that than I am.
I'm also going to go with bullish. I think even though, like Jimmy's saying, there's questionable news on the scaling, we still have a heck of a debate out there. I just feel like there's so many new people coming into Bitcoin, not just in the US, but in Japan and China and Korea. And it just really feels like the number of new people. And for a new person, they're like, all right, 2,300 is a good deal, or 2,200 is a good deal. They don't know. I mean, they're just getting into this. They want to get a little 0.1 or get a little Bitcoin or something, get it going. So I just think the numbers are with us for once.
Yeah, definitely. There's a... Yeah, like they're not anchored to a much lower number like we are. So yeah, that helps.
Let's see. It says Ripple is centralized and not interesting. That's not a question. That's a comment.
Yes, that's correct. But I agree with that comment.
Does sound apt. It sounds like a fair description. It is centralized, but the interesting part, I don't know, it went up from pennies to like 25 cents. So the market says that it's interesting. It doesn't matter technically. It doesn't matter objectively. The market has chosen to make Ripple interesting. So. Yeah,
I mean, and that's the thing with all these ICOs too, right? It's the market is, I think, behaving irrationally, and as I think it was Keynes that said, the market can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. I don't like the one that I can't understand is Tether, which is supposed to be pegged to $1, is trading at $1.03. Like, how's that possible? Why? I don't understand. but you know, like a lot of these cryptos, like Omni went up like a tremendous amount today. Like, I don't know where did this come from, right? Like,
what is Omni? It's a magazine from the 90s. It's a sci-fi. Read it. I don't understand what's going on.
Yeah, I like rebranded Mastercoin, right? Like it's just like
Napster. Napster, that's a good one. Napster ICO. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, it's just I don't understand a lot of these like to me it's a lot of very loud noise, right? Like you gotta separate signal from noise a lot of times, and you know, like a lot of trading tends to be noise, and you don't know what signal versus noise until like you see like long-term trend lines later. This seems more like a blip to me on a lot of these, but who knows? Maybe there is something more fundamental and some insider info that I don't know or something like that. Who knows?
Now, I was told there would be no math, but Vortex is disagreeing with you on ASIC boost being 1%. He says, Andreas says that it can produce 1,000 times increase when you factor in electricity cost. And maybe we could go to the whiteboard later, or somebody could do some screenshots on Twitter of the math behind this. But what do you think of Vortex's comment?
Well, that assumes that electricity costs and Bitcoin production costs are equal, which is not the case at the moment. And that may be true in the future, or may have been true in the past. But that's sort of the optimum equilibrium for any sort of mining. Right now, price has been rising so quickly that has not been the case for the past year. And when it's at equilibrium, I wrote a whole article about this actually, like how you know, Greg's numbers differ from Guy Corem's numbers. And you know, you can confirm all of Guy Corem's numbers. I talked to people at Canaan.io. I confirmed with them all of the numbers, right? Like how much per wafer at you know, Taiwan Semiconductor. How much does it cost to, you know, print the circuit board with you know, like this power supply and all this stuff. And like all of the costs are the costs, and you could figure out how much difficulty there is and all that stuff. Now, and Andreas is not wrong. He's just assuming like this is the optimum, right? This is the most savings they can possibly get. That's not the case right now, right? Like the current state of the network is such that they, if they had a covert ASIC boost, they would get about a 15 to 20% savings on their electricity costs, which are about 15 to 20% of their mining costs. It's probably much less now because Bitcoin has gone up so much. But basically, the profits that you're getting are like enormous compared to the electricity costs that you're spending, and we're nowhere near that equilibrium. And you know, I mean, like. This common sort of misconception is, hey, you know what, ASIC boost is like giving them so much money. No, you do the math, you do the numbers, it's like $2 million. Bitmain is easily making $200 million this year, right? Like just from their sales and all this other stuff. That's about 1%. And yeah, I mean, like, of course, would you like to have $2 million more? Of course they would. But you know, is it like a major factor into their decision making? I mean, maybe not. I honestly don't think it is.
We've got just a couple more questions. We kind of covered this, but just to recap, do you see a proof of work change in the future? Maybe not even associated with this. Maybe they just get tired of SHA-256, or it gets broken, maybe something.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if there's a vulnerability found in SHA-256, I think there would be a hard fork very quickly, and I don't think there would be any argument about it either, because you can steal money, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure, like, other than you know, Peter Todd's SHA-256 pinata, like similar one to the SHA-1 pinata he had, you know, like there would be, you know, other ways to sort of take advantage of that vulnerability. But yeah, I mean, certainly that would happen if there were a vulnerability found. I mean. I would imagine at some point, if Bitcoin lasts long enough, that sort of like a POW change every N years or something like that would be a reasonable sort of like BIP. And like, you know, like as a community, you have to sort of figure out which you know, hashing thing is reasonable. But then like, yeah, like that brings up all sorts of interesting questions. Like, what if like manufacturers get a lead on like developing ASICs for that particular proof of work algorithm. So yeah, it gets very tricky. But yeah, I mean, I can't see it not happening eventually. I think my friend Dave Collins, he's a lead developer at BTCD, and he does Decred as well. He says, like, you know, like long term, everything's gonna get broken, right? Long term, everything's gonna get broken. So you gotta plan for that in some way. So so yeah, I would say that that's gonna get broken, or that's going to change at some point.
And I could definitely see what you're saying. On one side, AMD wants them to change to their chip, and then Intel wants them to change to their chip. And they both got incredible resources and behind the scenes. And this guy really works for that guy, and that guy's a spy, and the whole thing. I mean, we're playing the big game then, right? We've got one more question. John writes, how is the recent push into countries such as Japan and China and Korea for Bitcoin acceptance going to accept the network if no scaling solution is reached?
So the question is about how is it going to continue expanding if
well, how does it affect, I think it's how does it affect retail Bitcoin? Like a lot of stores in Japan, electronic stores, they're taking it at point of sale at the register. If it slows down the network, if it makes, you know, confirmations take a day now, these kind of things, I think is what he's going towards.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And you know, once again, it's sort of medium of exchange versus store of value. That's more a medium of exchange question. Obviously, it would be helpful to have like SegWit or Lightning or something like that, so you can transact much faster, or even some other sort of thing. Who knows? I would expect that if sort of buying cameras in Japan gets popular with Bitcoin, that they would figure something out where you would have almost zero conf in some other network, but you still pay in Bitcoin, kind of something like that. As far as it affecting the price or anything like that, it doesn't seem to be affecting the price at all, honestly. People are like the people investing seem to look at it as an investment and not as a way to go buy cameras, right? Like that's I don't know. This has always sort of been the argument with Bitcoin. Well, are you using it to buy drugs, or are you like using it as a store of value? I think most people use it as a store of value, and medium of exchange is a minimal use case, at least in my mind. I don't know. Maybe other people like buy things all the time with Bitcoin, and at least for me, and I think for a lot of holders, that's not the case.
All right, we've got one more question. We kind of answered it earlier, but just to recap, they're asking, why can't we wait until 2018 for BIP 149 instead of activating BIP 148?
Yeah, great question. I would hope that BIP 140, that's I think the preferred option of most core developers. A lot of people in the know. I mean, honestly, there's a contingent of people on Twitter that want something now. And I don't know how much of that is tied up with sort of wanting to show their independence from miners or something like that. But there's certainly sort of an impatience that's been growing. And, I understand that, right? Like it feels like Bitcoin is stagnant, and it especially sucks because other coins have been going up, and like there's like all these ICOs and all this stuff, and it's like, well, maybe if we do this thing, then Bitcoin price can go however, go to the moon, I guess. And I can understand that frustration, and I totally get that. But like from a developer's perspective, it's you want the safe thing. You don't want to split. You don't want to change proof of work, and you want things to stay stable so that it proves itself as a store of value. At least that's what I want for Bitcoin. And and people have a right to their opinion, right? Like they can say, hey, I want it to scale and do whatever. And that's the wonderful thing about Bitcoin. It really doesn't care about what you say. It only cares about what you do. And doing may mean buying and selling coin, after a permanent fork, of course, or it may mean, buying mining equipment, to support the BIP 148 effort, or, in the future, maybe even BIP 149, or, like forking off Bitcoin Core if BIP8 doesn't make it through. Stuff like that. There's a lot of ways in which you know, as a person, you can contribute to it, but you know, to a large degree, you know, you can't, like, the hats and the Twitter things, those are really only signaling to other people and not to Bitcoin itself. And there are certain things that you will have to pay if you want to change Bitcoin.
You have to pay if you want to change Bitcoin. A good note to end on. And I'd just like to thank, we had about 105 or so viewers. Thanks so much for everyone for watching. You can check out Jimmy Song on Twitter at Jimmy Song, or on Medium, where he's been writing a lot of great articles. So check out Jimmy Song on Medium, give him a follow. And if you like this show and you'd like to donate some Bitcoin, maybe 10 bucks, 20 bucks, doesn't have to be a lot. And yeah, I guess the transaction fees are pretty high. So if you're going to send less than that, I'm not sure it's going to be worth your time. But you can go ahead and pause this and screenshot, use your Airbits wallet or whatever you got. I would appreciate. And thanks so much for everybody for watching. And we'll be back tomorrow night with Chris DeRose. We're going to talk about the ICOs. He's written a barn-busting article, and I can't wait to read parts of it out loud to you. Of course, you can read it now on Chris DeRose's Medium. And until next time, bye-bye.